And so there's something beautiful about saying, well, there's this one simple explanation, which is there's physical stuff. It's all described by this unified theory of physics, this set of equations, which I can write down on a piece of paper. And that explains everything that exists. The trouble is that sometimes you want your explanation to be simple, but not too simple. As Einstein emphasized, you want the simplest explanation that will account for all the data. Okay? So you don't want to start say the mind. Well, that must be physics too. Why is the universe exists? That must be physics. Why is the universe orderly? Well, physics explains it. Why? Everything. What's right and wrong? What's good and evil? It's all physics. The trouble is you end up throwing out a lot of things that need to be explained in order to achieve this simplicity.
Hi, welcome to the first episode of the Society of Catholic Scientists podcast. I am one of the co-hosts. I'm Dr. Dan Keebler. I'm a professor of biology at Franciscan University, and I am the vice president of the Society of Catholic Scientists. And joining me is my co-host, the president of the Society of Catholic Scientists, Dr. Stephen Barr. Steve, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you.
So we've been contemplating starting a podcast for the Society of Catholic Scientists over the past couple of months. A lot of members have talked to us about it, given us some ideas. And so we're finally going to jump into the podcast space here. And we're going to do a bunch of different things with our podcast. Some of the podcasts will be just discussions between Steve and I about different topics. Many of them will be discussions with some of our members. We have a lot of interesting stories, interesting takes on science and faith. Some of them will get some outside experts to talk about different topics. So we imagined, envision, I guess, having a variety of different types of podcasts here for the Society of Catholic Scientists. And for our first one, we were thinking that it would be good just to get to know a little bit about Steve Barr, about his background and why he launched the Society of Catholic Scientists, what motivated him to do that. So just, in terms of his background, Steve is a particle physicist. His academic career at the University of Delaware, and then moved into sort of the science and faith space and did a lot of work there, and then eventually started the Society of Catholic Scientists back in 2016. And so, just Steve, in terms of your background, it'd be interesting for me to hear. I'd love to know what got you into particle physics. Was that something you were, knew from an early age, or did you stumbled into that accidentally?
Well, it's kind of funny. A lot of scientists, they tell you how they got interested in science as a teenager or something like that. I actually always somehow knew I'd be in science I don't remember a single moment in my life where I ever asked what I would do for a living, what I'd do when I grew up. I always knew I'd be a scientist and that I'd be doing some kind of science. Had a lot of math in it because I loved math as a kid. And so I call myself a cradle physicist. I'm not just a cradle Catholic, I'm a cradle physicist. So I just followed my natural bent. And when I got to college, I went to Columbia University and I majored in physics. Didn't think twice about it. And then I went to grad school at Princeton, I again, in physics. And as far as particle physics, well, I thought it seemed like a very fundamental branch of science, and that appealed to me. And so I went into that. So again, it was just sort of following the path of least resistance for my interest.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like particle physics is sort of seems esoteric and mathematical in terms of a branch of physics, not as sort of applied. Is that true? Did that draw you into it to some extent? Or?
Yeah, I think so. It's mathematical and it's very fundamental. Maybe some people might not know what particle physics is. It sounds like maybe we're dealing with, the dust under your bed or something, particles, but what it is, it is the branch of physics which is asking what are the fundamental constituents of matter? What is all the matter in the universe made of? What are the forces by which this stuff interacts? And what are the fundamental laws, the mathematical laws that govern all of this? We're trying to find what are the ultimate laws of physics. And so that appealed to me. Sort of, I like to get to the heart of things. That seemed very exciting to me when I was younger and still does. And it is mathematical. But that's what now actually particle physics has evolved. Some branch of it's gone off into something called string theory, where the fundamental entities aren't particles like electrons and quarks and things, neutrinos and things, and photons. But maybe the fundamental stuff isn't particles. Maybe the fundamental stuff is strings, little loops of string, and that's called string theory. But that's the kind of thing I've spent the last 40 years working on.
Okay. Well, I think maybe we'd have a podcast somewhere down the road talking a little bit about particle physics and what it sort of reveals about the universe and so forth. But I think it'd be interesting to hear what got you into starting to do work in faith and science. I know I became aware of you first back from your articles in First Things. I know my wife and I would read those and we'd be always like, oh, it's another Steve Barr article. And I always, as a scientist, I always found them interesting and relevant to things that
well,
so what got you going?
Well, that's sort of how I got going. I mean, so I've always been interested in the theological, in philosophy and theology as well as science. And so from the time I was a teenager, maybe even before I was a teenager, I thought a lot about theology, philosophy, and possible questions raised by science for theology and philosophy. So I thought a lot about it for my own benefit. And then I never thought that I would actually get to be writing or speaking or being active in the science faith area. It sort of happened a little bit by accident. 1995, I read a book that got me I thought was extremely important and interesting, and I wrote a review and sent it into the magazine or the journal First Things. And much to my surprise, they actually accepted it and published it. And then that started me writing more and more articles and book reviews for First Things, which you mentioned that you read. And so that's how it all started basically. And one thing led to another, and giving talks about it, writing books about it, and eventually starting the Society of Catholic Scientists. So it was a little bit.
So did you have any formal training at all in like philosophy and theology? You just sort of go through that on your own, reading and learning things on your own?
Just on my own, because, I in college, I went to Columbia, so they had a lot of humanities courses as requirements, which I think is a very good thing. But otherwise, every course I took was math and physics. And so being science, physics, you really have to take a lot of, focus on that very intensively. But in my spare time, my own time, I did a lot, as I said, from the time I was a teenager, thought a lot about philosophy and theology. I did a lot of reading. I've done a lot of thinking about, a lot of reading in theology and philosophy, and on my own, just to satisfy my own questions. So I have no formal training in that at all, I confess. But I think I guess I'm what we call an amateur. An amateur is somebody who does something for love of the subject and rather than professionally. And sometimes amateurs can know almost as much as a professional. I wouldn't claim that in my own case with philosophy.
Well, sometimes I think they can see things from a different perspective, in a fresh way, because they haven't been in the field as long or so forth. Or see especially coming from science, that perspective on philosophy and theology that might be a little bit different. Same as a lot of theologians and philosophers have a little bit different perspective on science when they come into it. That can be refreshing for sure. Right. So what is it that got you, was the impetus then to start the Society of Catholic Scientists, and how did that come about?
Well, because I wrote a lot about science and faith for First Things and other magazines, and was interviewed sometimes and gave a lot of talks around the country, mostly also in some foreign countries. I came across a lot of Catholic scientists. A lot of Catholic scientists became aware of me and my writings and so on. And I got contacted by a professor of astrophysics at Cornell, very eminent astrophysicist. He's now at Caltech. He's the head of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out there. He's member of the National Academy of Sciences, Jonathan Lunine. And he emailed me and said he just read an interview that I'd given in a magazine. And we got talking about things by email. He suggested the idea. He said, why don't we start an organization of Catholic scientists? And I said, that's a good idea. In fact, that was sort of in the back of my mind as something that would be a good thing to do for many years, but I didn't actually expect to do it. but the two of us sort of urged each other on, and he and I and other three other scientists, maybe it was four, started it in 2016.
Okay, and what was the goals of doing that? Why would you go through? I'm sure it was a lot of work putting an entity like this together. And so, what would you say? Hey, if somebody, elevator pitch, what are the goals of the Society of Catholic Scientists?
I think there are four that are in our mission statement. One, it's for the benefit of the Catholic scientists themselves, but also for a wider audience, the general public. For Catholic scientists, it has two functions. One, it's a place where they can talk to each other, have fellowship with each other, have intellectual and spiritual fellowship with each other. And that's important because often Catholic scientists, whether they're in the academic world or in laboratories somewhere, they don't often get a chance to talk to other Catholic scientists. They can sometimes feel isolated from each other. The academic world isn't always a very friendly place for people with certain viewpoints, and sometimes for people who are religious, the academic world can be a little bit hostile or indifferent. And so there's not a lot people. Scientists don't get to talk to each other about religious and philosophical and theological questions often in their workplace. So it's a forum for discussion, but also, so that's the sort of for our own benefit to meet and have fellowship and to have serious discussions. For the general public, we'd like to show the world that science and faith are in harmony with each other, because there's this belief out there that they're in conflict somehow, or that they're inconsistent. You can't be a scientific person and a religious person. You have to choose. Is it science or is it God? And so we want to show the world that is not the case. And in fact, we have, we're now a big organization. We have thousands of scientist members and a website with a lot of things on it, science and faith. And we feel this has a value to educate the public, to overcome this misconception of a conflict.
Yeah. So, we have this annual meeting, and we have also local chapters that help build that fellowship amongst members. So that's you can see that. One of the things that I'd like to, get your take on is this conflict narrative that's out there. And I think that's something that you see in students when they come into some of my classes. You see that in sort of a lot of general population. This idea that you said that science and faith, or particularly Catholic Church, are in some way in conflict with each other. And that's one of the things that society tries to counteract. But what is it that you think that drives that amongst the people? I mean, obviously that there is this sort of myth belief, but why do you think people find that so compelling, or at least are a lot of times willing to accept that sort of unquestioningly?
Well, this is a meme, I guess we'd call it now, this whole science religion conflict idea. It's been around for a long time, probably for at least 200 years. Intensified in the late 19th century and even more intensified recently. And an example of that is, and a lot of it's driven, frankly, by sort of very active propaganda by people who are atheists or hostile to religion. One thinks recently of the so-called New Atheist movement, which has had a tremendous influence. But the roots, there are a number of reasons, I think, why people think that science and religion are in conflict. I think what's driving a lot of this, of course, as I said, is propaganda, but there are certain arguments that are made by people who claim that there's a...
Yeah, and it really seems that one of the things that the Society of Catholic Scientists, particularly like on our website, there's a lot of stuff there to try to sort of give people resources to debunk that myth.
Maybe I should go. So you ask, why are people receptive to this? So what are the arguments that the new atheists are making that people are listening to and responding to? I think there are, and we're answering. We're trying to answer.
Yeah,
we are answering. I think there's several kinds of arguments. One is a historical argument or claim that historically this is something that most people believe. This is just the conventional wisdom. Everyone believes it. that historically religious institutions, churches, the Catholic Church included, and maybe in particular, have made war on science, that they're hostile to science. They tried to suppress science. People think of the first name that comes to mind when people think about the Catholic Church and science is Galileo. And I know this because I've spoken to audiences and asked them what name comes to mind, and they all say Galileo. And so there is this image of the religion sort of keeping science back or suppressing it. And so there's that historical warfare myth. But there's also, aside from that, there are philosophical arguments that the atheists make. They say that religion is based on, science is based on reason and evidence, which is true, but that religion is not based on any reason or evidence, but in fact, it's based on believing in things without any evidence and for no good reason.
Yeah, right.
And so they say there's this just inherent conflict in the fundamental nature of religion, which is based on dogma and faith and mystery and stuff, which they think is irrational. And so there's just an inherent contradiction. And then there's another strain, which is that line of argument, which is that the actual discoveries of modern science have debunked religion, whether it has to do with human origins and whether it has to do with how the universe began, or whether neuroscience and physics telling us about our own minds and debunking the idea of a soul. There's a whole range of topics on which the atheists claim that the actual discoveries of science have debunked religious belief. And so we're responding to all of that. And as you said, on our website, we have articles on virtually all of these topics and material on our website.
Yeah. I think one of the things that it would be good to focus on, I think, because I think it's sort of the underlying sort of assumption there, was sort of your second point there about this supposed conflict because science does things one way and faith does things in totally the opposite way. It seems like there's amongst the science and faith conflict thesis people, there's a misunderstanding of particularly Catholicism and the Catholic approach to faith, where faith is reasonable, right? That there's a rational aspect to that there's something sort of inherent in sort of a Catholic view of the world that would make it amenable to science, right?
Yeah. Right.
How would you describe that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the idea that on the negative side, the idea that religion is not based on any rational foundation or evidence, that's something there are some people out there who believe for just because they want to believe. It's like wishful thinking or something like that. Yeah. But the idea that actually the Catholic Church insists, this is actually a teaching of the Catholic Church, that a belief isn't just something that we choose to do for no reason. That's actually something called fideism, where you say, no, we don't need any rational basis for what we believe. We just believe it because we want to. No, that the church condemned. The church insists that there is a rational basis. And there are philosophical arguments, for the existence of God that go back for millennia. Somebody who thinks that, so the Catholic Church puts a very high premium on reason,
right.
And supporting its doctrines with reason. Anyone who looks in, say, the works of St. Thomas Aquinas will see that it is a lot of debating back and forth and arguments given on both sides of issues and so on. So that's it's a misconception that somehow religion involves suppressing reason or putting it aside. That nothing could be further from the truth. But yes, but as you say, not only on the positive side, science itself. I mean, there are aspects of the Catholic faith that and of theism in general that are sort of conducive to scientific inquiry. It's not just that they're not in conflict, faith and reason, but our faith actually is in some ways the Catholic belief and Christian belief are in many ways conducive to scientific inquiry in a number of ways.
Yeah, and I think that's lost on a lot of people, that there is that synergy there in terms of, seeing that there's sort of a rational basis for the world around us, that we could find order and so forth, because
right.
It is the gift of God, and seeing science as understanding God's creation, and there's certain things that resonate there.
Right. I mean, two things they allude to. One is that the mere fact that the universe is an orderly place. That requires an explanation. In fact, you go back to early Christian writings, to the church fathers. They say this, all of them say this, that the two main reasons from the universe, looking at the universe, the physical universe, there are two things about it that point to God. One is that it exists at all. So there must be a cause. Why does the universe exist? Why does anything exist? There must be a source of being. And the other is that the universe is an orderly place, which we should take for granted. It's not only orderly, but it's extremely orderly. It's a very deep and a sophisticated mathematical structure, as we know from physics. Where does that order? Why is the universe an orderly and lawful place? And the traditional argument is there must be a giver of order. The laws of nature point to a lawgiver. And so these are both ways. This is some of the evidence from the world that there is a creator. And not just that, there are other aspects of Christian belief. We believe that the creator is good and the world he made, therefore, must be good. In fact, the book of Genesis said when God creates the world, he looked upon it and saw that it was good. And so we believe the created world is good and worth studying because it's God's handiwork. It's God's masterpiece, as it were. And so it's clearly, if a Christian would be interested in studying this world that God created. In fact, the earliest from centuries, the great scientists, most of them from the time of Copernicus and Galileo up until relatively recently, up until the late 19th century, most scientists were profoundly religious. They were Christians. Generally, Protestants, Catholics, about equal number. But one of my favorite statements was by one of the founders of science in the 400 years ago, Johannes Kepler, who wrote in his in one of his books, "I thank thee, Lord God, our Creator, that thou hast allowed me to see the beauty in your work of creation." And this was the attitude of scientists for a long time. What they were doing was uncovering the hidden beauty in the created world. And so they were motivated by their Christian belief. Yeah. They saw it as practically a religious, scientific investigation of this created world was a way of giving glory to God.
Why do you think we lost that sense? Because if you ask somebody to think about science now, it's more of this sterile investigation of empirical truth, but it doesn't have this sort of larger metaphysical context of sort of belief in a creator and drawing you into something larger, right? It's almost been divorced in the last 100 years, that the thought of science is leading people, or at least that's the popular meme, leaning people towards atheism, right?
There are probably a number of reasons for that. One of them, I think, is actually pointed to by something in the Old Testament. There's a wonderful passage in the Old Testament book of Wisdom, which was written sometime around 50 BC. And the author of that book is reflecting on the Greek science, the great science and philosophy of ancient Greece. And he is sort of lamenting the fact that so many of those ancient Greek scientists did not know of the creator. And he's sort of wondering, why is that? And this author said, the Book of Wisdom says, they may be so sort of entranced by the beauty of what they're studying, captivated by it. It's not the words he uses. That they sort of don't look up above it and ask where it's coming from. You know, it's almost like if you read a book and you're just so absorbed in a poem, say, and you don't think about the fact that there's a poet, because you're so focused on the poem itself, or on the novel itself, or on the symphony or the piece of music itself, that you can forget that this actually had a source, that there was an author of this thing. I think that's part of it psychologically, but there's other reasons. I think it's not just. I think that there are a number of factors that led people involved in science more and more to a non-religious view of things. And I think a lot of that has to do with the growth of a materialistic, not in the sense of greed, but philosophical materialism, the idea that nothing exists except matter. And I think that is something that has grown stronger and stronger over the several centuries, that many people under the influence of modern science have drawn the false conclusion that somehow all that exists is what, say, the physicist studies, the material things.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big issue, and a lot of people don't even realize that they're subscribing to that, because it's not as if like there's all this philosophical training nowadays. Like you were saying, you never, you have few courses in humanities as an undergraduate, but you have scientists that have not had any, philosophical training and don't really realize sort of the air they're sort of breathing, and don't even realize those questions actually there's complex questions there that science might not be able to answer, right?
Right. I mean, it's partly the success of science itself. The physical sciences, physics, chemistry, and so forth, and biology, the natural sciences have been so amazingly successful in explaining so much about the world that it's tempting to think that, say, especially for a physicist, it's tempting to think, well, we've explained so much about what's going on around us, much more than many non-scientists appreciate, that maybe it explains just everything.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a nice simple view of the world. That mind wants simplicity of explanation. If something has a single explanation, that's better than having to invoke 3 or 4 explanations. So the whole nature of explanation is to try to explain as much as you can with as few assumptions as you can. And so there's something beautiful about saying, well, there's this one simple explanation, which is this physical stuff. It's all described by this unified theory of physics, this set of equations, which I can write down on a piece of paper. And that explains everything that exists. The trouble is that sometimes you want your explanation to be simple, but not too simple. As Einstein emphasized, you want the simplest explanation that will account for all the data. Okay?
Right.
So you don't want to start say the mind. Well, that must be physics too. Why is the universe exist? That must be physics. Why is the universe orderly? Well, physics explains it. Why? Everything. What's right and wrong? What's good and evil? It's all physics. The trouble is you end up throwing out a lot of things that need to be explained in order to achieve this simplicity. I think this is part of it, a large part of it. And so people get drawn. It's almost an occupational hazard. If you're studying matter, and someone said, if to a person with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? If you're an economist, everything looks like economic forces at work. If you're a political scientist, everything is struggles for. If you're a psychologist, everything has a psychological explanation. If you're studying matter, then everything is matter. Right.
Right. And you get blinded to that, and you don't even look at some of the other related questions.
Right. I think that's the problem.
Yeah.
Sort of a blinkered look.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about what the society is doing, and trying to combat these, or to see this sort of possible synergy between science and faith, and what our efforts are. So what are the sort of major efforts, sort of outreach efforts that you see in the society to educate people about these
right.
things?
So to begin with, we did only 2 things. We had an annual conference. This was when we started out in 2016. We had an annual conference where we brought together our members and had lectures, which we videotaped. All the lectures, all the talks from our conferences are up on the website. And the other was our website, where we had a lot of material, which I like to talk about later, what's on the website. But then we sort of starting to branch out. We have now approximately 30, we call them college chapters, mostly in the U.S. and Canada, a few elsewhere. And they have lectures. They sponsor public lectures and other activities on their campuses or in their area. And some of these chapters, most of them embrace not just a single college or university, but a group of them in a city or in a region. We also have a couple of national chapters in Europe, one in Spain and one in Poland. And they have, the Spanish chapter has an annual conference as well, held in Spanish. And the Polish chapter has had an inaugural conference, and we'll have other conferences. We also have something that's very exciting we've been doing for the last 4 years for high school students and teachers and parents. It's called the St. Albert Initiative. We're excited about this. What we do is it's like a 1 day or maybe a 6-hour program with talks, with poster displays given by Catholic scientists, where the high school students and their teachers can come and talk to Catholic scientists about their work and about their fields of science and so forth. And we have, as I said, a set of talks on various science, religion topics. We first had the first one in Washington, D.C., then we had one in Chicago, one in Philadelphia, one in New Orleans. And the one that's coming up now this year is in Louisville, Kentucky. And we expect 400 people to be at it. We started, the first one had 100, and then it was over 200. And now, we're expecting 400 high school students and teachers to come to it. So that's part of our outreach. And we're going to start the podcast.
That's great. The St. Albert Initiative was great. I'm going to be going to that. I'm going to bring my high school age son with me. He came home the other day he had a history class where he was doing a presentation. He was going to do a presentation on the origins of the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, and how, he said, it finally escaped the clutches of the church and science took off. And I almost fell over. I'm like, oh my gosh, my son, you're falling for the same sort of myth that's out there. So I was like, we got to get you to one of these events.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of this mythology, we're going to be talking about this in a future episode, but there's this very strong myth that I mentioned earlier about the religious institutions and people sort of being warring against religion, trying to spread. That is so, to anyone who actually knows some of the history of science, it's preposterous, but it is, as I said, everyone out there. But when I was growing up, this is what I picked up from the books about science that I was reading. This mythology is all around us in popular entertainment and in more serious books. So that's one of the things we're pushing back against.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd say, these local chapters, we have one here at Franciscan. I think we have 6 or 7 members of the society here at Franciscan University, and we have it's wonderful. We have a lecture series going on this semester. We have like 8 lectures, I think, that we get a lot of students from, and we get them from all different disciplines coming in. So it's a nice outreach, and it's a nice fellowship for us to have.
When you say you have 6 members, you mean 6 faculty members, but I know there are a lot of students involved.
Yes, yeah, we had 6 faculty members who are full members of the Society of the Society of Catholic Scientists, but we get a lot of the students here coming to those, so that's great. And
I know that. So we probably have, because we have about 30 chapters. Some of them are just starting up, but we have dozens of lectures a year given all over at these different campuses that are fairly well attended. And I should say that each college chapter, in order to start one, we have at least 3 Catholic scientists who are there as sort of the board, as sort of the anchor of the society, and so also students. And so there's both, we have undergrads, grad students, postdocs, professors, and so on involved in these chapters.
Yeah. And as you said, not all of them, like Franciscan, we're lucky we have enough here on campus to have our own chapter, but you have some that are city-based where you have 5 faculty members at different institutions, but it's enough to have a city-based one.
Right. So we'll have, there's a Philadelphia, we just started this Philadelphia area chapter. So there are people at Penn, at Drexel, a number of different colleges and universities in the Philadelphia area. We actually have one in a state sort of level one in Michigan, and Michigan's a big place. So there's actually quite a few institutions scattered. And so there's sort of little sub-chapters, as it were. Yeah, so we have quite a lot going at the college level and now at the high school level.
That's good. So where would people go to find out if they're interested in a member or somebody joining one of these local chapters?
Okay, so on our website, so I should plug our website because our website is our pride and joy.
Yes, which is CatholicScientists.org.
Catholic Scientists, one word, plural, CatholicScientists.org. But even if you just Google Catholic and scientist or Catholic and science, you're going to find it very quickly.
Yeah, we paid Google enough that we're way at the top of the search. So you
I think
we're at the top.
We're at the top if you Google those. And so on there, if you go to the menu, first of all, if you scroll down, you'll see panels which tell some of the main things on the website. But if you go to the menu, you'll find chapters, and you click on that, and it lists all of the chapters with email address of a person to contact if you're interested in joining. We tend to put more on those little chapter pages on our website. Right now, we basically just have the contact person and a list and of some of their recent events, with many cases links to go to information about those events. But yeah, that's where they would go if they're interested in joining or just finding out about what the chapters are up to.
Great. What is anything else on the website you want to talk about that you want to plug? I mean, there's a lot there, and I think a lot of it addresses these things we've been talking about.
Right. There's a lot there, which we think is very high quality material. If you're interested in science and faith, especially if you're Catholic, and you want to go into some depth on, or just even learn things not in depth, the place to go, I think, is our website. So I'll mention 3 things that we have there. One, for people who are just interested in something relatively quick, go to the common questions on science and faith. Okay. If you scroll down, that's one of the panels. And there we have 16 very commonly asked questions. We know that these are the 16 questions most commonly asked by high school students about science and faith, what they ask their teachers about science and faith. All sorts of things about evolution, miracles, the Big Bang, the human mind, and so on. And we have meaty answers. Each question has about a 800-word answer, which I think is very nice, self-contained answer to these questions with recommendations for further reading and so forth. So that's one of the first things I would go to. But then we have articles. At this point, we have over 40 articles. We put up about 8 a year. And these, I don't think there's a place where you find is sort of brought together articles on science and faith, generally from a Catholic perspective. There's a few articles by Protestants, but they're all from a Christian perspective, mostly Catholic, on science faith issues. And they run the gamut. These are very good articles. I don't think there's any place where you're going to find as many really high quality articles. And these are aimed at a broad audience. These are not for academics or specialists. These are not technical, or dry technical. These are meant for a broad audience. They cover everything from human origins and evolution, the Big Bang, the history questions, neuroscience and the soul. Does neuroscience prove that we don't have a soul? All sorts of basic questions. And these are really good articles. A third thing would be our bios of Catholic scientists of the past. This is called Important Catholic Scientists of the Past. And there's 100 little biographies, mini biographies of them. And it's well curated. If you want to learn about Catholic scientists of the past, and if you were to Google, and you will find all sorts of lists of Catholic scientists on the internet. Most of them are very bad. They're poorly curated. They're unreliable. But ours is very carefully curated. These 100 scientists are people we know were believing and practicing Catholics and who made major impact on the history of science. Almost all the people on this list or this set of bios are people who are famous in scientific history. Things are named after them. They're founded, in some cases, whole branches of science. Little mini biographies of them, including information about their Catholic faith. So that, I think, is really fun to browse through. Not just fun, it's just really eye-opening. I think any Catholic student, any high school student, college student, anybody who's wondering about the role of Catholics or the Catholic Church in the history of science, this is the place to look, because you're just going to be blown away by the sheer number of great scientists who are Catholic believers, all the way from the Middle Ages, actually, up into the 21st century.
Yeah, I think it's a great resource for educators. Because I teach a couple science and faith courses here at Franciscan. And these students that come into the class are from all different disciplines. They're not scientific disciplines; they're theology, psychology, philosophy, and whatnot. And we use a lot of the articles that are on the website to introduce topics, and it really frames things really well, gets them to think about it. So there's a lot of resources there that even high school students, if you're teaching a course and want to, give them a reading about something, if you're talking about evolution, or you're talking about the mind and brain, there's a lot of good things there to get you started that are accessible to those students, I really think. So.
I'd say most of the stuff, the bios, I guess they're 99 bios of Catholic science. Those are accessible to high school students. The common questions are designed about science and faith are designed to be accessible to high school students, but nevertheless, they're not dumbed down or at some childish level. They are meaty answers. So even the brightest high school student, your most brilliant high school student, is going to benefit from this, as well as ones who are maybe more just ordinary high school students. The articles, I think also, most of them, I think, would be accessible to high school students. So as you say, George Weigel, the Catholic writer and thinker, he said that our website is a treasure trove of valuable educational information. So high school teachers, if you're listening, professors, anyone involved in education, please visit our website. There's just a lot of material that you can use.
Yeah. And everything's free on that website. So
everything's free.
Yeah. So, Steve, we're getting here to the end of our time here for this podcast. What is your sort of vision for the Society of Catholic Scientists in the next 5 years? What goals do you have? Goals and things you'd like to do and expand and see happen with the society?
Well, unfortunately, it's kind of, the problem is there's too many things that we want to do. I mean, so one thing, of course, is fundraising, because some of these things cost money, but we want to expand the number of college chapters. I've been contacted now by places, different people at different universities saying, how do we start one? We give each chapter some money. So, I mean, we would like to have 100 college chapters, but it's going to have to be a gradual process we're of course starting this podcast. We would like to have more events for high school students, more of these St. Albert Initiative kinds of things. People are always suggesting, I should say, this is also on our website, a discussion forum for members of the society. To be a member, you can either be, I should say, you either have to be a scientist with a doctorate or a master's degree in a natural science. What we mean by that's explained on the website. But also science majors in college can be students, and graduate students can be student members. But on the website, if you are a member, you have access to a discussion forum. That's another thing on the website. But there's just a lot of things people are constantly suggesting that we do. There's only 24 hours in a day, so we haven't gotten all the way down the to-do list yet, but certainly expanding the number of chapters and the kinds of activities for high school students is maybe. Yeah,
and launching this podcast is one of those things that we're getting off. And we've got a lot of different ideas for topics on the podcast coming up. Particularly, a lot of those topics that we have articles on the website, we can bring some experts on and have them talk a little bit more about some of the topics that you were mentioning earlier about evolution, mind and brain and cosmology and the history of science. So lots of things to talk about in future episodes. So Steve, thanks for being here today and answering all the questions about the society, and good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, Dan.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing, and we will notify you as future episodes become available. If you'd like to find more related content or more information about the Society of Catholic Scientists, or if you're interested in donating to support our work, please visit us on the web at catholicscientists.org.